What's up, everybody? We are live back in the BassLife studios. I'm your host, Bob Adler. Oh, what's going on here? I've got a delay. Oh, well. I'm your host, Bob Adler, and welcome back to BassLife. We got a great show lined up for you. We've got the Nick Cousvis 2.0 special going on today. We had him on last week, and we had such a great time with him. We had to have him back. And we're going to get into some crankbaits, topwater action, and all kinds of stuff. We'll answer your questions if you have any. But I couldn't do this show without my co-host from last week, Mr. Danny Dunn. Danny.
Hey, what's going on? That's great, man.
How you doing, buddy?
Actually, you know what? I'm doing great. The heat and humidity is what it is. I'm not going to complain because I remember, I think it was no more than about 4 weeks ago, I was out on Tri-Lakes and I couldn't feel my fingertips. So I am really good.
I am enjoying the heat.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I'm looking out the window and I'm looking at the families out there in the pool. So, you know, that's kind of okay. I'm a little bit disappointed because I'm rigging stuff up, get ready for bass season. And I'm literally running things through the pool, and nobody is happy when you're running baits through the pool when they're in it.
Nice.
Yeah, it's just how I roll, right? You got to tune test everything.
I do the same thing in my pool.
There you go. About pre-fishing.
Hey,
no sense. Bob's back.
Oh,
you know what, Wendy? We can have that conversation a little bit later, or if Bob wants to talk about it later, we can. I look at pre-fishing totally different than most guys do. So
I don't know what happened there.
I'm not sure, but I hope it was gratifying.
It was not. I told you the storms were moving through Georgetown here, and it's getting crazy out there.
So somebody just asked me for the link. Where is what are we looking for? What am I sending them to? BassLife.
Just go to YouTube and hit BassLife, and you're good to go.
YouTube, BassLife. I like Wendy's question about pre-fishing. Although, was Wendy the one who made the comment last time about Bob talked too much and maybe I talked too much, didn't get a word in edgewise?
No, that was my aunt. Now this is my sister.
Oh, good. I felt bad when I read that. I'm like, did I really do that?
No, I deleted it.
Oh, did you really?
Yes,
Dude, you're not supposed to do that. This is Canada.
No, I deleted it. So when I got cut off, I was talking about how great you were around the barbecue.
Oh, dude, I'm telling you, how was the chicken? Like, be honest. Was it good?
It was so good, it probably make you slap your mom. Okay, that's how good it was.
I'm telling you. Hold on. My buddy's just saying I don't see it live. Send me a link. I'll send it to him. But anyways, the trick is the way that I did it. And you know, a lot of people, when they put food on a barbecue and they put it on a rotisserie, they put a pan underneath it to catch the drippings. And that's what you and I talked about, right?
Yeah.
But the real key is to get some nice, fragrant, aromatic, same thing. And I shouldn't really even be saying this because Nick is a way better chef than what I am. He's culinary trained, but to get some, 2 inches of liquid into the bottom of that and not run those middle burners. I usually get those middle burners going and getting stuff cooking and bubbling, and then I turn them off and then let it rotisserie. And then as it steams, it's flavoring the chicken. And I mean, it's just, you can do that with most meats. It just does a great job.
Well, my brother-in-law is a fabulous cook. So is my sister. But that chicken was awesome. But you know what, Danny? It got me thinking. I thought, you know what? We can add a segment to this show, a cooking segment. With you as the host.
I would be in.
And you know what? I even got a name for it.
What's that?
Stick me with a fork. I'm done.
Actually, Lisa got a plaque made for me behind the barbecue, and it says "Flippin' Awesome."
Yeah, that'll work.
It's got a spatula. It's got a spatula in the picture. So it's we do all. I love cooking inside, outside. Everything: the meats, the pastas, the fish. I'll tell you. I'll share a recipe with you later of my spaghetti pie, spaghetti cake It's like 4 inches thick. Oh yeah, man.
Wow.
To die for.
Wow.
That's how I keep this Olympic box.
Is that how you do that?
Yeah, that's how.
Cool. Okay, listen. After we had Nick on, folks, last week, and the response was overwhelming. And when I mean overwhelming, my phone blew up, my email box got flooded. Let me read to you, Danny, some of the emails that I got. This one's from Dan, and it's just, when is Nick going to be back on the show?
That's all.
Just straight up, right?
Yeah, right at it.
This one's from Pete. Nick is so awesome, he should host the show.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I'm done. See ya.
What? No, not co-host. He wanted to host the show. That means I'm gone.
That's you. You're gone.
I'm gone. Well, come on.
Pull that up. You better call your agent, bro.
And the last one, well, actually, was from somebody named Pat. And at first they said, "Why is Nick so damn handsome? It's not fair."
I would second that.
And then I don't know if it's Pat. I don't know if this is a guy or a girl, but he says, "I want to have Nick's baby."
You know what Pat is? Pat is George.
But you know what? That wasn't even the greatest one.
What's the
I
greatest
actually
one?
got a message from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau.
Oh, no way.
He sent me a video message. Let me play it for you here. Hang on.
All right, let's
bring Nick Cousvis back to the show as soon as possible. He is informative, and I love him.
Whoa.
That's awesome.
That got a little weird at the end, though.
It did. It did. His voice got... Actually, you know what? It still might be George.
It might be George. George, is that you, buddy?
It has to be.
Okay, folks, without further ado, the guy's so nice, we had to bring him back twice. Mr. Nick Cousvis.
There he is.
Nicky!
What's up, guys? What's up?
How you doing, buddy?
You know.
Do you believe that? The Prime Minister sent a message to me demanding you be back on the show.
You know what? I was waiting. I couldn't believe he didn't ask a question while we were live. I was waiting for that.
He just
likes you, Nick, because you speak moistly.
Oh, that's right. Maybe that's why.
Oh, man.
That's funny. No, Nick, in all seriousness, I got a lot of great response from last week's show. You were awesome on it. And I actually had some questions from people after the show asking a little bit about the jerkbait stuff. So I just want to ask you a couple questions from last week. Then we're going to delve right into the crankbait stuff. So one of the questions was, I don't think we were clear on the pound test leader, fluorocarbon leader that we're using on the jerkbaits, just on average.
Yeah, so on average, I mean, 10-pound test is just your overall, best line diameter to use. It's like I said, in some situations when I'm trying to get a little deeper, I may go to 8. I'm not really worried about, fish taking me out into boulders because I'm fishing deeper water. And then the other side of it is I could go to 12 if I'm fishing a little bit bigger jerkbait, or I'm shallow around a lot of cover. So I don't want that bait to get down deep. But if the fish drags me around that, rocks or boulders or something sharp, I'm not so worried about him cutting me off like I would be with 10 pounds. So,
okay, so this is open water stuff for the most part, yeah?
Yeah, for the most part. For the most part.
Okay, and then one of the other questions was, guys were asking me about jerkbaits for largemouth.
Yeah.
Oh man, for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's talk about that for a second. What's the deal there? How do you approach that?
So, I mean, when you're fishing largemouth, you're target fishing, right? So it's not smallmouth. Smallmouth, there are certain situations where you're target fishing. You're seeing that boulder off to the side, or a rock pile. You're fishing a rock line or whatever. But with largemouth, they're predatory fish where they will hang around and hide behind a log or a rock or like a weed line, and they'll wait for something to come out and grab it. So I'm casting to edges of docks. Weed lines is big, Nick,
I was gonna say that, on Quinny, there's not very many weed lines that most guys don't know about. And then you get the guys that, you see them, right? You get the dunkers that are out there dunking the edge.
Yeah.
Then you got the old, the double barrel, the Senko slingers that are out there firing them off the edge.
Yeah.
And then, for me, I either go down there with a mega beat or a +1 jerk bait down that edge.
Yeah.
And, guys turn around, they can just see you get fish back out there. And I know you and Jasper did well out there in a couple of tournaments. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Did you get him on a jerk bait out there?
Yeah, we caught him on jerk baits. We caught him on crankbaits. The one day, we had one day where we just whacked him on crankbaits. It was just weird. We had a spot that we'd found about 4 or 5 days before the tournament, and we went back there and turned on we didn't have live scope back then. It was
Panoptics, probably.
Yeah, Panoptics. And you put it down, and it was just, there was stuff going on. There was fish swimming around. So I looked at this blob that was sitting in we were in like 18 feet of water, and it was maybe 2-3 feet under the surface. And I'm like, it looks pretty big. It could be a largemouth. And I made a cast. I had a deep diving crankbait. So I made a cast with the crankbait in 2 turns. In 18 feet, I got bit. And I'm like, I got one. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I got one. And I said, it was that one that was out there. And it was like a 4.5 pound largemouth. And every day we went back, we didn't even make a cast. We just turned the Panoptics around, look around. There was bait fish, all kinds of stuff. The first day we went in there and we weighed just under 20, but we lost a couple of real big ones. Oh. And then on the way to the tournament on day 2, there was a massive thunderstorm. Like the forecast for that day, like when I went to bed, was sunny and hot. No chance of rain, 0. So we're driving down the highway. I know I'm getting off, but it's pretty funny. We're driving down the highway, and I'm seeing these flashes off to the left, like on that 401 going eastbound. And there's all these flashes, and I'm not paying attention. I'm talking to Jasper, but I keep seeing them, and I turn like, what are those flashes? Like, I thought it was a transformer, but I'm like, dude, we've been driving for half an hour. It can't be the same transformer, right? So I get on my app. I go on my app on my radar, and I look at it, and I'm like, there's just this giant thunderstorm falling south. And I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the direction it's going. I'm like, dude, it's going to hit Belleville like smack dab. Like, you couldn't aim it any better. And I don't know if that spooked the fish. There was an hour delay or whatever. But, man, when we put down that Panoptics in the morning and looked around, it was just dead. There was nothing. So we had to scramble around. We scrambled around for 13 pounds. But, the jerk baits and crankbaits are a big deal. And, a lot of guys don't throw them. They think it's just an open water, casting, blind casting. But, if you really understand and you mark your waypoints properly and get that edge on, and you can make those parallel casts or 45-degree casts, those fish are aggressive along that edge, and they'll come up and hit a jerk bait. And it's something that a lot of guys aren't doing around weeds. You know what I mean?
I'll tell you something, a funny story about the Pro-Am. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 years ago. I don't know if you remember, Nick, that one year Andy had the Pro-Am out of Aurelia, and it was tough. I mean, I hate to remember it this way, but it was the year that Gary passed away. And Simcoe was just done. Like, there was 2.5s everywhere. Nobody knew where the big fish went. And I remember I finished 6th in that tournament. Yeah. And I was the only cat in the top 10 that weighed 4 largemouth and 1 smallie each day. Oh, wow. And how I caught that smallie was great. Each of those smallies in those 2 days. So as soon as we blast off out of the morning, I zoom left. Everybody goes straight through, right? Because we're out of Aurelia. I hang a left. I go into up into Cooch, jump on a weed line, throwing a crankbait up there. I deep dive into crankbait. I jack like 16, 17 pounds by like 8:30, and then I go out into Simcoe, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go find me a big fish. So I'm running around. I remember it in practice down off the back of Thora. There was a great big rock in about 12, 14 feet of water. And I remember seeing 2 giant smallmouth swimming around this big giant rock. And I figured I'm going to try to save them fish. So anyways, here I am at the north end. I'm running around. It's like 1:30, 1:45. And I'm like, it's flat. I'm going. And my non goes, we're going where? I said, we're going to the backside of Thora. He goes, it's like 1:45, and you're going to go to Thora, fish, get back, go through the 10K zone. I'm like, sit down. So off we went. So I blasting right. I'm flying down the lake, and I'm like, just be there, just be there, just be there. So I get there, and Rob Hyatt is sitting right on top of the rock. And I'm like, damn it. And he's a good smallmouth fisherman, right?
Yeah.
He's sitting there with a cigarette in his mouth and he's like, Donner, nothing's biting around here. I'm like, okay. So he jumps in that Triton and he blasts off. And my non goes, what are we going to do now? I said, trust me, I know what to do. So I break out the deep diving crank, big mega bass. I put it on a spinning rod and I fire that thing as far as I can fire it past the rock. And I'm dredging it, right? Dredging it. Boom. I feel it hit the rock. I pause it. Kaboom! This 5 and change just pastes it. So I'm looking at that. I'm fighting it, and my non still has his freaking life jacket on. And he's like, we got to go. We got to go. So he nets the fish. I cut the jerkbait, the crankbait off, fire it in the well, grab the small fish, toss it out, and off we go. And I'm rocking all the way back to friggin' Aurelia. We're in the 10K zone. And, you know, I stop the boat, I disconnect my, shut it down, take off my kill switch. I said, drive the boat now. So I let him get him all hooked up, and I got to get the crankbait out. There's this fish with this friggin' crankbait stuck like this. So we go up there, JP's weighing in, and I weigh like 2140 or something like that, right? With a 5 and change smallie. So day 2, lo and behold, same thing. But this time, when I blast off in the morning and go left, like 7 boats come left with me, right? Because they're like, Dunner's on some fish. So Azumi was out there, Chonger was out there, White was out there. Anyways, and I am just pasting them on the weed line with, you know, catching them on a crankbait. Nobody else is catching any fish. So I get my 17, whatever, and I'm like, I'm out of here. So I run around the north end, running all kinds of stuff, catching 3, 3.5, not helping. And I said to myself, if I make that run, this time I'm going to leave earlier. Well, 10 to 2 comes along, and I'm like, shit, I'm going. And my non's like, we're going where? I said, don't worry about it. Just sit down. So we're driving. He goes, Aurelia's this way. I said, I'm just ignoring him, right? Lo and behold, man, I get right back up to that rock. I take out that same friggin' crankbait. I fire that friggin' thing out there again. Reel it. Boom. There's the rock. Pause. Nothing. Shit. Start reeling again. Boom. Almost pulls the rod out of my freaking hand. It's like 570, right? Same thing. Get it in the net, cut it off, throw it in the live well. He goes, what are you doing? And I'm like, believe it or not, I've done this before, right? Get all the way up there again. And while I'm in line, waiting to weigh in, Azumi's there. He's going, huh, I thought that was you. I said to my non, I wonder who that asshole is who up there's pasting all them fish on a weed line. He goes, what were you catching them on? I said, on a deep diving crankbait. He's like, no, man. I said, oh yeah. So we waited in like another 2065 or something like that. Yeah. And I didn't think it was enough. I went and put the boat on the trailer or whatever. And ended up, I finished like 4th or 5th. All on that freaking crankbait, bang it off of something. But, you know, it's funny, right? And we'll talk about banging crankbaits off and that.
Yeah,
I just
for sure.
Well, speaking of crankbaits, Nick, what, you know, for people who are new to crankbait fishing, let's talk about the Mega Bass lineup. What are some of the more popular crankbaits in that lineup that guys could take a look at for their first time getting into cranking?
Yeah, I mean, crankbaits can get a little overwhelming. I mean, and there's right now, Mega Bass has like a huge lineup of crankbaits, but you know, start with like, we'll go from shallow to deep. I brought a couple of them just to kind of show it a little bit easier than trying to explain it. But, you know, if you're fishing shallow water, it's really hard to beat square bill. Square bill is kind of like this. You could see the bill on that, how square that is. Yeah. Put it right up there.
And that's a rounded body, right? That's a rounded body crankbait.
Yeah, rounded body. Now,
there's not even getting into the flat sides, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of versions. This one has a little bit more of a round body. The S crank, which I don't have here, has a little bit more rounded body. And then you'll get into like the Sonic side, which is very flat sided. But they all got square bills. And the reason for the square bill is deflection. So it'll bounce off stuff and you just don't get hung up a lot. You know, it gets down there, kicks off something, bounces off. You know, you let it float back up again and then start to retrieve. You know, I really talk a lot about setup in anything I'm doing. And setup with crankbait rods, I mean, with crankbaits is super important because, you know, jerkbait's great. Everybody's got sort of a different style. There are some things that we talk about, you know, the parabolic belly, all that stuff, to let the bait do its thing. But with a crankbait, feel is super important. Everybody looks at a crankbait as like a power thing, and it is a power thing, but it's a finesse thing as far as feel goes, and you understanding what that bait's doing on the bottom all the time. Because if you're not in constant contact with that bait, you get into all sorts of problems like getting hung up. You don't realize it's getting into somewhere where it shouldn't, and then you keep reeling it in. So the key is, again, to try to match that rod to the weight of the bait. Don't throw a 3/4 ounce crankbait with a rod that's only rated for like a 3/8 ounce. It's just going to overpower the rod. It ends up pulling that tip a lot, and then you lose a lot of feel and control because that rod is just not heavy enough. The other side is if you go with a rod that's rated for, 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce, and you're throwing, a 3/16 or a 3/8 ounce crankbait, now you just get no feel. It's too light. You can't cast it. So trying to get that balance. And the way I always look at it, those numbers on those rods are ultra important, right? You want to kind of try and be in that middle of the ground of that rod. So if it's like a 1/2 ounce to a 1 ounce, something between a 1/2 and a 3/4 ounce is kind of where you want to be. That gives you your best feel, right? So,
well, Nick, I want to just jump in and ask you a question. Yeah. So I've noticed from the years, because, again, a lot of people just think I throw a jig a lot, and really, I really love to throw a lot of hard baits, and I just like to keep that a secret. But when I look at it this way, right? If I look at a half, and this is how I set up my crankbait rods, and I mean, as I take a look at it and say, okay, I'm going to throw like a 1/2 ounce or a 3/8 ounce crankbait, shallow, like a square bill. But then if I turn around and throw that same bait, same weight, but that bait's going to drive, 18 to 20 feet, then I actually change the type of rod to be a little bit stiffer rod, because I know that son of a gun's going to dig, right? And it's going to give me a little bit more, do you make those types of changes, or am I just crazy?
Yeah, no, all the time. And it depends what you're fishing too, right? So if you're fishing largemouth or you're fishing structure, when I mean structure, I mean like objects that you could see, docks, wood, weed lines, then I tend to go with something shorter because you're going to get more accurate casting, right?
Yeah.
So generally guys that are just starting off, like really overall, a nice 7-foot rod is just great for just a guy that's just getting in. I'm not expecting a guy to say, hey, I'm just starting with crankbaits. Okay, you need like 4 rods. You need this rod. You don't need 4. To start off, just get a 7-foot medium, but you don't want something extra fast. Stay away from extra fast. Anytime you have any treble hook bait, you're better off to go to something that's more of a, mod to fast or moderate action, something with a little bit more bend. It allows you to cast into the wind a little bit better. You don't get backlashes. That rod doesn't try to snap back too quickly. But, that shorter rod gives you some control in your casting ability, more accurate casting, and then you'll get some feel, right? So it's very important. If you're trying, just simple, it's like 10 to 14 pound fluorocarbon, just average out on a 7-foot crankbait rod. Medium, heavy.
Now, are you running that, when you say that 12 to 14 fluorocarbon, are you running that from stem to stern on the reel, or are you running, maybe some braid and then using that?
Yeah, I'm not a braid guy when it comes to crankbaits. In some situations,
me neither.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Back in the days when crankbaits really got popular, the Americans were really big on those just all glass rods, right? They're super whippy. They were kind of heavy. The reason for that is because they're not fishing weeds. They generally fish in a lot of open water, rock, wood, and stuff like that. And the whole point of that rod is it's got a lot of bend, and they're throwing mono on top of that, right? Yeah. And there's not a lot of feel because glass is not as sensitive as graphite was. So when that bait's getting down and you're cranking, and they're throwing a lot of like deep dive and stuff, but the whole thing of it, when they're cranking it, because of the dull feel of it, that fish is able to really get his mouth on the crankbait because you're not reacting to it too quickly. So they didn't want fiberglass rods because they thought, graphite, because it's more feel, there's more sensitivity, and you tend to kind of jerk on it a little bit faster than you'd want to. You want that fish to engulf that bait. So when you get those hooks in its mouth, and then you get a pretty solid hook set. But here up north, we got a lot of weeds. We got other stuff. It's good. I have some rods that are a little bit of a blend. Deep divers, I tend to go to blend. Shallow stuff, lipless, square bills, stuff like that. I like to have a little bit more graphite. I'm fishing around weeds. I could snap that bait off the weeds and then continue that retrieve. You know, a lot of times when that bait gets hung up, that little quick snap is a lot of times where you trigger.
It's gold,
right? Yeah,
it's gold. It was like that 1 year. It was like that 1 year for Chonger and I in Quinny. You know, we'd get that crankbait down into it, then we'd snap it out, and then when you snap it out, you just hang on. By the way, that wasn't me cracking a beer in the background. That's my wife cracking.
That's okay.
And I'm gonna have to go get a little bit of this.
So Nick, what is square bills kind of taken off? They've kind of become the dominant crankbait nowadays, as opposed to back in the day with the round bills and stuff like that. Is that true?
Yeah, they really are. They're fairly easy to use. I actually had a customer out a couple of weeks ago. We were up north on a pike lake, and we were just working on some technique and stuff like that. And I just said, look, the whole key to this bait is that it allows you to cover some water. Yeah. If once you start getting that feel, it's not really a bait you're going to get hung up on. When I was on Lake Kentucky I went to pick up my boat, and then we had an extra couple of days, so we whipped over to Lake Kentucky, and we did a couple of days. There's a lot of brush piles in the water that are like, they're in like 7 to 10 feet of water. Some of them a little shallower, but they're underwater. You could see them. Some of the water was clear, and you can see them. And I just watched a bunch of boats in this bay flipping jigs and Senkos and stuff like that, and we're just having some fun. So there wasn't anywhere else to go, so I got him behind him, and I'm just tied on this square bill, an S crank. And what I did was I really, we're having fun. So I'm like, I'm going to throw this bait past this huge brush pile and just crank it slowly right over top of the stuff. The entire day I threw that bait, I only got hung up like once or twice. Can't remember if we talked about this last week, but it is, if you really get a feel. So here's the other thing that's super key. We talked about rods, we talk about bend, but the reel when it comes to crankbaits is super important. There's this big fad right now with these high speed reels, 8 to 1, 9 to 1, 10 to 1.
Speed demons.
Yeah, speed demon, just burn it. But what people don't realize is that's hard to do. A lot of guys think, it's okay, I can get this for spinner baits, but then if I want to throw a crankbait on it, I could just slow it down. You don't realize one revolution, how much you're moving, how much line you're picking up. And in a crankbait, you're moving it so quickly that you lose all feel. You got to picture a crankbait almost like a tube on the bottom, and you're just inching it along. I get that crankbait, whether it's a deep dive or whatever, and I cast it out there, and I get it down, and now I'm hitting bottom. Now I'm just slowly cranking it, and that bait is just boom, 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 stop and go, stop and go. That what triggers fish. If I'm burning it too fast, you end up just covering water way too quickly. You overwork the bait. You overwork your body too, because there's a lot of force that comes off that lip trying to work it. Yeah. So crankbait reels, something in the 5s, a fast retrieve would be like a 6.2, 6.3. That's it.
Oh, that's slow, eh?
That's slow because it's all about feel. You don't want to overwork that bait. You don't understand what's going on. You make that bait hit the cover too quickly, and you end up getting hung up in all kinds of other issues.
It's funny. I remember back in the day, we used to when I used to have the Quantum Zebco reels, they would have a pitching and flipping reel. Then they had a cranking reel, and that reel was like a 5 to 1.
Right.
Wow. And I just couldn't. I remember taking that reel, going, I'm just going to throw a spinnerbait with that thing. And I threw a spinnerbait, and I'm reeling like crazy. And I'm like, my spinnerbait's freaking sinking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just
and you can't do it with that. You overwork your body trying to keep up with that. But for crankbaits, that slower retrieve is what you want. And I mean, it's the same thing. Like the nice thing is, I've had some guys say, well, if I get that for crankbaits, then what else can I use that reel for? Well, it's also a great swim bait reel too, right?
Yeah.
6.3 is just a nice overall, like that Tatula 6.3 is my workhorse, whether it's the SV, whether it's the Elite. I mean, I just work that with my swim baits, my crankbait.
We're getting that storm. My door just blew open. Hold on a second.
Oh, yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, it's looking pretty bad out here now too.
Yeah, we're getting it too. So, is it traditional thinking on the crankbait is you have to hit something?
Yeah.
Right. That's what we were taught way back in the day with crankbaits. Yeah. You need to be hitting bottom. You need to be hitting cover.
Right.
Is that still apply? Like even with the square bills, because I know the square bills when you're running them, they deflect on their own.
They do.
And they kind of mimic that. We touched a little bit on that last week.
We
And they
did with
kind
the
of
extra.
they
Yeah.
mimic that hitting a rock or something. But are
They
you
do.
still looking to hit cover?
You know, when I'm throwing shallow cranks, I really like banging in the cover.
Yeah.
Having said that, like I'll throw that same bait for say smallmouth where there's not a lot of cover, and I'm in like on a flat that could be 5 to 7 feet, and I'll mimic that bait hitting something by reeling it down and then popping the rod tip, reeling it down, popping the rod tip, and then what it's doing is it's coming down, boom, and then it goes back up, and so it acts like it's hitting something, even though I'm not hitting something. I think the
Right.
bigger key is that what are the fish eating in that lake when you're throwing that crankbait? So a lot of people think, well, it's a crankbait. It mimics, it looks like a minnow. Well, it can, but generally crankbaits really mimic crayfish a lot more.
Fleeing
So
crayfish.
getting down there in the crevices of the rocks,
Yeah.
banging it, or like bait fish that are low on those rocks. So when someone says, well, you have to hit bottom or you can't catch fish, it's completely not true. But generally, guys are trying to get that crankbait down because those fish are sitting low to the bottom. I've been in situations like St. Clair, for example, where you're throwing a medium diving crankbait. You can in some situations, but generally that lake is just a bowl full of weeds. And those weeds grow up anywhere from 5, 10 feet off the bottom. So throwing a crankbait, if you were in 18 feet of water and you thought, okay, I'm going to throw this crankbait that gets down 18 feet, you're just going to be pulling weeds all the time. So the key there is to get a crankbait that comes down, if that's your weed top, comes down just brushing the weed top and then going back up.
Right.
So you're not really banging off anything, but what I'm doing is I get that crankbait getting down. When it's down to depth, I'll stop. I'll give it a pop, stop, give it a pop, stop. So it's going down. Oh, it's going down. Oh, so it gives it that same thing. And that, all it is just that triggering effect of doing something different that might, trigger a strike. So I'm not hitting the bottom, but I'm kind of trying to do the same thing. So it all depends really. If I'm thinking I'm throwing a crankbait because fish are eating crayfish, then yes, I want to bang that bottom. I want to get down because that's where the crayfish are. So the fish are looking down.
And on Simcoe, when I was doing that before in the Pro-Am, when I was dredging that crankbait, when I would get into some of the shallower water, and we've all seen it, especially when you get into Cooch, and you're watching all those crayfish scoot along backwards, you don't see the crayfish. All you see is a little trail of dust, of sand it's leaving.
That's right.
And boy, when they hit it mean.
Yeah, you know what? Crankbaits are fun bait, and it's popular. They've gotten a lot more popular, but they're still not. Like if you get into anybody, just randomly check a boat. There's very few guys throwing crankbaits.
I don't know. I know a guy who's got at least 3 boxes of them.
It seems like it's more of a U.S. thing, but I mean, it has its applications here.
Well, I'll tell you. For example, if I don't know if you guys do, but I have for years, and maybe one day they'll be my memoirs. But I keep fishing. I keep fishing logs, right? So I know that when the water is high, we get a big summer. We get a big winter. We get a big runoff. The weeds don't grow. I mean, especially, you can get into that stuff where we get a cold winter, lots of snow. The sun doesn't get down. Weeds don't grow up so well in the spring. So that early walleye, that early first bit of July or June, not a lot of weed growth. I know for a fact that as soon as bass season opens and everybody runs to the bank, this old guy, I'll stay out off the bank and I'll pick up a crankbait and I'll work those flats with a crankbait because a lot of them fish are not on the bank. A lot of those fish are off the bank. So, it's just a great, like you said, a great search bait. Especially when patterning, when you're looking at the water is high, the weeds are low. Yeah, everybody will be out there throwing a spinnerbait. How many cats in the Kawarthas are out there throwing a crankbait that's going to get from a foot to 3 feet, and you can cover some water, and when they hit it like they're hitting it from the old neighborhood.
I think the hard thing about crankbaits and why a lot of guys sort of shy away from them, you got treble hooks. You get the guy that's just learning gets hung up a lot. He's going into a lake that's got some scattered weed and stuff like that, and he's looking at it. He picks up a crankbait. He's not really sure how deep it goes, and then they just start chucking and whining, and then all they do is they're just getting stuck in the weed all the time. So it's really understanding, what you're fishing, and then tackle the area with the bait that matches what's going on. So if I'm fishing some scattered weed in like 8 feet of water, I'm not going to throw a crankbait that's going down 8 feet because I'm just going to get hung up.
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I don't know if Dwayne's Jacob's still in here, but there was probably 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I fished a tournament on Buckhorn with Josh Westering and Lower Buck, and he lives there and he knows it real well. We ran around to a whole bunch of weed clumps, but one part in the day, I reached down the rod locker, said, "Man, I'm gonna throw a crankbait. These fish are not in the weeds; they got to be off it." And of course, I reached down into that locker and I got a 2-aught hook right into my finger. And I spent the next 10 minutes pulling that thing out. And then I said, "You know what? I'm putting that damn crankbait away." It bit me. So then we come back, and I don't know, we might have had 14 or 15 pounds, but guys just jacked them.
Yeah.
And how did they jack them? They moved off the weeds and were throwing a crankbait on the outside of the weed edge.
Right.
And I was sitting there to Josh and I said, "See, if I didn't drive that hook in my hand, I was doing the right thing." You know, so if you're flipping weeds and the fish aren't in them, they're either above them or on the outside of them. And there's just a crankbait is just a great way to get them. Because again, like you said, how many guys are out there throwing a crankbait? And again, it's one of those things, man, that if you're doing it right, you really can't just, you know, take your spinnerbait rod, bite it off and put on a crankbait. Right? You can't take your flipping stick and bite it off. But if you've got your flipping stick and go, "You know, dude, I'm going to throw a tube." Well, you bite off your jig and you throw a tube. "Well, no, you know what? I'm going to throw a worm." Then you bite off your worm. It's more, you know, specific as far as equipment goes. But it's like anything, right? If you're going to be a plumber, have the right tools and you'll be an awesome plumber.
Yeah, 100%. The tools are important. And I mean, you know, it's like anything. Like when I try to learn something, I would leave everything else at home. You know, I wasn't a good crankbait fisherman when I was younger. So I had to, like, you know, I grabbed 2-3 rods. I left everything at home and I just put crankbaits in my box, in the boat. And if I was going to catch fish that day, it was going to be on a crankbait. Or if I didn't catch any fish, then that's the way it goes. But at the end of the day, you know, whether it was a successful day catching fish or not, it was more than successful because I was a better crankbait fisherman by the end of the day. I started to understand feel. I mean, now I could throw a crankbait down and I could tell you if I'm gravel. I could tell you if I'm on rock. Now I know our graphs nowadays, they tell us all that anyways. So, you know, but back in the days, we would throw deep diving crankbaits to see what is on the bottom. Is it boulders? Is it gravel? Is it sand? And you know, when you get down there, you're like, "Oh yeah, that's sand." Now, a guy that's just starting wouldn't be able to know that, but over time, it'd be like, "Oh yeah, I get this. I see. I know what's going on now." So, and when you get to that point, then you can really whack them. Then
it's funny, you know. It's like boats. When I first started fishing, the first boat that I had was a 12-foot Sterling with an 8-horse Merc on it. Yeah. And you know, people say, "So how was it that you learned how to find fish?" Well, I used to go up to my uncle's trailer up in Sparrow Lake, and I had a 12-foot aluminum. How friggin' far do you think that I could go with that thing? So I basically had a 1-mile radius of this trailer park, and I had to learn to catch fish anywhere from a mile north, south, east, and west of where that trailer park was. You know, so the whole thing about, you know, as soon as you start fishing, you go out and buy yourself a great big bass boat. Those guys burn more gas than they do, you know, actually learning how to find fish, right? So same type of deal, right? You train yourself. Listen, if you want to be a better crankbait fisherman or a better jerkbait fisherman, it's largemouth or smallmouth, I agree 1,000%. That's the only thing you got. It's going to be very humbling, or you're going to learn an awful lot, and it's the best way to accelerate your learning curve for sure.
That's right. Yeah.
So when we were talking last week about jerkbaits and hooks on jerkbaits, you were saying that it's ultra important to keep the stock hooks on them. Is the same deal with the crankbaits?
Crankbaits, you could play a little bit different. Like, you know, most of the Megabass uses 2 or 3 different brands of hooks. I think they use some Gamakatsu. There's some Owner, and then there's another one. Some of these come with the same style hook that you would see on the jerkbait, like this one right here. Where the barbs are L barbs. This is X1. This is an X150. It's 8 to 10 foot crankbait. But a lot of them come with just those regular round treble hooks, gammies. You could change them. It won't change a whole lot. Again, look at the hook and try and match the hatch. You know, I have like a little scale here at home that weighs super light stuff, and I'll make sure if I look at a hook that looks good, you know, I'll check it. But generally, you know, with these hooks, I just have a bunch of extras and I flip them. If it's one of those generic round hooks that you can get, whether it's Owner or Gammy, you know, you pick some guys like EWGs where they bend in a bit. You know, I don't really find one or the other. The ones that Megabass makes, the ones that they use on their cranks, they're all good. They're deep diving. I have no issues. I catch a crap load of fish, and I never worry about bending or breaking the hooks. They're super strong. Again, it's a more aggressive play, so you can get away with some heavier hooks. Yeah.
Okay, so what about sizes? I mean, do they come in the 1.2, 1.5, and 2.0? Is that right?
Yeah. So this like S cranks come in a 1.2, 1.5, and a 2.0. They each go a little bit deeper, but they're also it's a larger profile. Then you start getting into, like I said, this X150 right here. Then they have a Deep X300, which is one size up from this. So this is like an 8 to 10. Deep X300 gets into that, say 10 to 14, 15 on a long cast. And then the Deep 6, which is one of my favorites.
That's my bad boy.
That gets you down almost, they say
we got to go to a commercial break. Stop talking about that stuff.
Really, like 18 feet, pretty easy.
Quiet. 2 feet quiet, yo.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic bait. It really is that one and the X300, just my favorite in that style. When I start getting shallower, there's a whole bunch. There's a new one that we got out last year. I'm super stoked about. It's called an I times I shad. There's two of them. There's a type R and then there's a type 3. There's actually one in the middle, but they haven't released it here in North America yet. The type R is shallow. It's like 3-4 feet deep, but it is like a slow suspending. So similar to the 110, the jerkbait, it rises, but super slow.
Yeah.
And then the type 3 gets down around, say, 10 feet, but they're super small. They come with that micro LBO system, which is just that it's like a cylinder that goes. So rather than the beads that you find in the 110s where that tungsten ball rolls in, this is actually like a cylinder on a train, and it's got magnets on both sides of the bait. So when you go to cast it, it drops to the back, so that allows you to cast it super far. When it hits the water, you just give the bait a pop, drops the nose down, and then that weight goes down to the nose and makes it dive down real quickly. It's suspending too, but it's so small. It's great for clear water. I was just out walleye fishing last week, playing around on Rice Lake, and I'm like, I played around with these baits a little bit, but I wanted to play around, to actually get into the point where I'm catching some fish. And I whacked them I whack walleye. The funny thing was, just like I said, I had a deep and a shallow. I was in 10 feet of water, throwing at the edge. The fish weren't on the edge. The edge of the weeds was very sparse, and then it got thicker. On the edge part, I started throwing this shallow one. It only goes down 3 feet in 10 feet of water, but there was a lot of sunfish, perch that were up high. I caught walleye on that all day long, 3 feet, down 3 feet in 10 feet of water. They were all up high, and they were crushing this thing.
Yeah.
It just has such a lifelike action, stop and go. So it's a crank, but it's kind of like a crank slash jerkbait. You can kind of use it in both scenarios a little bit. You can twitch it and stop it. It's fantastic bait. So, I mean, I like playing around with a lot of them because profile is important, depth's important, a little bit of everything. Sometimes they don't want something big. So you get a profile that's this big. You were smacking them yesterday. You go back to this today, and all of a sudden you're not catching anything. The first thing, if I don't, I'm changing color, but if I'm just not feeling it, I may go to a smaller profile. Calmer water, clearer water. A lot of times that smaller profile will get more bites, especially when fish are not crazy aggressive.
Yeah, but also, I guess, like early in the year when the young of the perch or the young sunfish, I mean, when you start talking about throwing that little one, that the young of the year sunfish and the young of the year or the 1-year-old sunfish, all those baits, all those fish, like even this year, beginning of the year, the first week of the season for myself, even if I'm frog fishing, I'm throwing the one size down on a frog. I'm throwing the one size down on a jig.
Yeah, for sure.
Because everything's just a little bit smaller in the beginning of the year, right?
Match the hatch, right?
Yeah.
Match the hatch. So, just an easy thing. If you, again, like we talked about jerk baits and how I would pick something. I have something in my brain, clear water. I'm going to something a little more translucent, spring, maybe smaller, fall bigger. Same thing with crankbait, right? So early in the year, right away I start with smaller stuff and flat sides. We touched on that a bit. Flat side gives you a tighter wobble. So remember back in the days that, what was it called? The Bella Shad Wrap.
The Shad Wrap, the pose were like that too.
Right. Really shallow. And tight wobble. They don't want that big, wide wobble when they're not aggressive, right? So that tight wobble catches more fish. As the season progresses, then I'll go to bigger and in wider wobbles, but I'll go to that tight wobble again in conditions where, like, maybe you have a cold front or fish are just off and they don't, that wide wobble might just turn them off. So again, I like to play around with that stuff. Believe me, you can really dial in on patterns that way. If you don't have it, in your boat, you just don't know. You're either, and some guys will do that. Look, this is my crankbait, and if I don't catch fish on this, I go to something different. But I think for the most part, it's such a productive bait, and you can fish it in so many different conditions and structures. I love them. It's fantastic.
Well, it's not like fishing a jig. And how many times you've been fishing a jig and you go, damn it, he pulled my pants down. Either this trailer slipped on it, and don't get me wrong, I'm a jig slinger from way back. But the skirt, and I'm missing a rattle, damn it, and the skirt slipped, and the chunk is torn, I'm missing a claw. And I mean, if you are the ultimate lazy fisherman like I am, that's why I used to love pork. You put one piece on,
that's it. You never have to worry about it.
No, and at the end of the day, you turn it around, pop it off, stick it back in the jar, and say, see you next weekend, right? And the crankbait's like that. You would tie it on. You might give the line a little check to make sure it's not nicked, and you fire that thing back out there all day long. So
yeah, but Danny, I heard that there was a study out by Pure Fishing that did the missing appendages on the trailer, and they said the fish actually reacted better to missing appendages on, let's say, a flapping hog. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not reading that deep into that stuff. I mean, we need to put our glasses like this and need to talk about it, right? I don't know. I mean, somebody at Pure Fishing's got some time on their hands. It's all right.
Yeah, I know.
And when they start selling us packages of craws with one missing, I got a whole boatload of them at the end of every turn.
Yeah,
there you go. There you go. So Nick, like in the springtime, let's 1.2.
Yeah, well, now again, it depends. So yeah, springtime 1.2 or 1.5. I rarely would throw that 2.0, except if I'm really, the fish are real aggressive for whatever reason, then I might switch to try and get a bigger bite. But generally 1.2, 1.5 is just a good all around bait. The eye times eye is another good one. Just something small. Think small. Think something, under half ounce. Don't get into those big crankbaits that roll too much. Now, when that water starts warming up, again, here in the spring, we're not fishing bass, we're fishing walleye. But if you get down the Lake Erie or whatever, is a perfect example. When that water temp is, when we first get on, it could be in the low 40s, sometimes even in the high 30s, like it was this year. Like, you're just not going to catch fish on crankbaits. Just too aggressive. Generally most crankbaits float up. So unless you weight those hooks down so that it doesn't go back up, like, you're just not. That's why the jerkbait is so good in cold water, because you twitch it down and you stop it. You could just have that bait sit in their face forever. So it's just one of the best options for catching fish, because anything else, you think of anything else, even if you can get it down there, like a swim bait or something, generally you want to keep moving that. Yeah, you could put a swim bait down and let it sit there, or a tube is also good. But that jerk bait that sits in their face, they see it very easily. It's just an easy target for them to go to eat, and they don't really have to exert a lot of energy to do it. So crankbaits definitely, as the season goes on, I tend to use them more. Once we start getting into the 50s and higher, then they become much more productive, especially in the 60s. Again, it just depends. Like I said, that day we were fishing walleye, it was flat calm. I thought, man, it's going to be big and it's going to be something on the bottom. Buddy's throwing that and he's not getting. I'm like, well, I'll throw a crankbait until you catch one. And then I was just catching them one after the other on a crankbait. So, like I said, we start with what the conditions show us. But if it isn't working, don't be afraid to switch the other way. But definitely small, 1.2, 1.5 in the spring. And as you start moving, then you could start getting into some bigger stuff. And like I said, once I get into the fall, I almost entirely just throw big cranks. You got to think those fish are trying to feed up for the winter time. They're not chasing a little bait. The bait is bigger at that point, and especially big when I'm targeting, which I generally target big fish. I'm looking for that one fish that's going to eat that one big meal. And whether it's a swim bait or a jerk bait or a crankbait, I go big.
So, and this applies to both smallies and buckets too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Buckets, huge. Man, back in the days when we used to fish Cook's Bay all the time, those deep weed lines.
Oh my
fabulous. God. Yeah. Remember how good they were back in those days?
Oh my gosh. You get out off You get out off those water pipes, and oh my gosh,
yeah, but
it
big
was nuts.
deep diving crankbaits caught the biggest fish. Now, if the conditions were, you know, off, you had a big cold front come in, then a lot of times that would shut that bite off, and you'd have to go to a, you know, a small worm or something to get those same big fish to bite. But when the conditions are right, you know, pre-cold front conditions, man, that crankbait, you get a little bit of wind going, look out. It's deadly.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So, okay, we've covered jerkbaits last week, got really into crankbaits this week. Let's talk about Megabass's topwater selection that they have.
Yeah,
because they've got some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, like so many, and I know there's no way I'll remember them all, but you know, the ones that I use most, the Pop X, the Pop Max, which is a, you know, a popping kind of bait, chugging kind of bait, you know, cupped head, and you know, splashes water.
Dude, we're getting it now.
Is it that bad?
Well, I was going to call the guy to get some water put in the pool, but I think I'm good now, bro.
Danny looks scared, Nick.
Look, there's Dorothy.
So, you know, again, you know, real good baits. And then, you know, then you have walk dog styles like a Giant Dog X, the DeMonte Dog X or Giant Dog X, which is similar. You know, they're kind of like the cigar style baits. Walk the dog.
Spooks.
Yeah, a little bit more complicated because you again, it becomes more like a jerk bait where you have to impart the action in that bait. You can't just wind it back or it's just gonna, you know, just run straight through the water. It's not effective that way. You know, and then they have a new one called an I-wing, which is like a big, you know, wing that kind of.
I saw that on the website today. What is that?
Yeah,
holy jitterbug, man.
Yeah, it's like a oversized jitterbug.
Remember the old crazy crawler?
Yeah, a lot of commotion. Chris Zaldane uses that a lot in Texas, and he's done very well. And I mean, I'm sure you'll catch fish up here too doing that. They are working on a smaller one right now. I think it's going to be unbelievable. So a little tiny one. It's going to be. I can't remember the number they're calling, but it's the I-wing, just a smaller version of it. But generally, your you know, prop bait, popping style, and then walk the dog cigar style. Those are the three. Giant Dog is an old one. It's been around forever. It's actually my favorite one. The difference between that and the DeMonte is a heavier bait. It's a 3/4 ounce compared to a 1/2 ounce. The whole purpose of that, Zaldane wanted a topwater that he can, you know, it was like a search bait, cover water. So
I call that thing the baby seagull.
Yeah, right. Absolutely, yeah. You can fire that thing out there 3/4 ounce, but you can really work it fast. You can't overwork that bait. You know, no matter how hard I pop it, it just keeps going, and it actually can jump out of the water.
Yeah, I was just going to say it jumps out too.
It really does. It holds its line very well. Where the Giant Dog, it's almost a little bit more finesse style. So you can't, if you work it too fast, then it tends to kind of overwork like you would a jerk bait, and it ends up twisting itself up. It's not as good. So up north, when I'm fishing up north, I love that Giant Dog, man. I've caught some huge largemouth and smallmouth, some big pike. I've had some big muskie that have broke me off. I mean, it is a fantastic, it is a fish catching machine. Now, I did a tournament years ago, a fun tournament. Bob Azumi used to have at on one of his private lake little thing there. And it was a corporate thing that he did. And he'd invite a few of us over and we'd have a couple of clients in the boat. And, you know, we'd put these baits on one afternoon, just the perfect conditions, you know, cloudy, a little overcast, just a slight little breeze. And we just whacked the crap out of them, you know, just a wind blown shoreline, and they were just all over it, you know, one after the other. It was fun.
We've got your co-angler from 6 years ago, Tyler.
Right.
Is in the chat, and he's saying the Grand Siglet is unreal for smallies.
That's right. Yeah. Fantastic bait. Another one. Yeah. So it just looks like almost like a cicada or whatever, like a little bug. And it.
Yeah. I was on the website today. I had a look at it. Yeah. They look really good. Really good.
Fantastic. Yeah. Another
do you know if Megabass is getting into spy baits at all and any kind of thing like that?
You know, we have one. It's called an Explose, but the difference between that is a real finesse bait. It comes in two sizes. There's a large size and a smaller one. Smaller one, I think, is only available in Japan right now. I have a few of them. They're super light. The bigger one is a little heavier. You can cast it, but it's a real slow fall. So generally, those ones really work well in super shallow water. Once I start getting deeper, it just takes it's too much patience. You got to wait for that thing to get down too low.
Man, that ADHD kicks in, and I'm already looking for another rod.
Yeah,
we gotta move. We gotta move, man.
Exactly. Exactly.
When you're on the water, that's what it's all about. You gotta move.
Yeah, I only made 4 casts today, and it took forever for that thing to get to the bottom.
Yeah. But,
but if you got a 5-pounder on each one, then who cares, right?
Oh,
there
exactly.
you go. See, there you go. You got another 15 pounds, Bob.
Yeah.
See, no matter what.
Yeah.
Well, I had a day on Simcoe with those. We're talking about those props. They explode, and we were in like 10 to 12 feet of water, and I was looking. I had some stuff in the box, and I grabbed it, and I'm like, it was flat calm, and I could see the fish. We were getting them on jerks a little bit high, so I'm like, I bet you this would work today. You don't really have to let it sink that far down. So I gave it to my customer. I said, look, just cast it out there, count it down to 5, and just start your retrieve. Just steady, slow retrieve. He whacked the crap out of them on that bait. It was unbelievable. It was just a little, again, translucent bait. So it looked kind of ghost-like, and have those 2 little blades spinning, and they're looking up all the time. And it actually outproduced the jerk bait that day. It was a blast. But just one of those things. But generally, that would be a shallow water bait. With the top waters, a lot of guys ask me, well, how do you know what to throw? Again, I keep it pretty simple. I'll use the popper in super calm water. Popper doesn't work as well where you have some chop going. It's just not a bait. It's super flat water. It's great. But that walk the dog bait, like giant dog or Demonte, you could throw that in like a 2-foot chop and you still catch fish. Yeah. But when you start getting some wave action, that's still a good bait to throw. Then I'll go to the cigar style bait.
What about setup for those deals?
Yeah, setup, that's the one. It's kind of funny. When I'm fishing smallmouth with that Demonte giant dog, I go braid. And sometimes I don't even have a fluorocarbon leader. Yeah. So, here's one thing. A lot of guys, we don't all have 40 rods in our house to switch back and forth. And a lot of guys, fluorocarbons become very popular. And that's what a lot of guys, if some guys have a reel, they might put fluorocarbon on it. You can't use fluorocarbon with topwaters because fluorocarbon sinks. So I had a customer of mine that said, oh, I bought all these baits, but they're crap. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, they don't work. There's no, I can't get them to work. And I'm like, okay, well, explain, send me a picture of your setup. Tell me what it is. Well, he had fluorocarbon line on. So the line was sinking and it was fighting against the baits. I'm like, you got to have mono or braid on that or else it can't work. He's like, oh, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
But I like braid because those baits have bigger hooks. And if I go to mono on a long cast, you might have trouble getting those hooks into a fish. So I go braid, and actually when I get the hooks in, I fight that fish super aggressively. I don't baby it because it's like I get those hooks in and I'm just trying to reel it in. So I go a little bit heavier. The Diablo Spec R, like 7.2 bait caster, is one of my favorites for that, for like a giant dog cigar style. It's a little bit longer, but it still has, the tip is soft-ish, but about, through a quarter down, it's all beef after that. So you get good hook sets in, a lot of control from distance working that bait. If the rod's too short, making those long casts across flats, it's hard to get that bait to actually do what you want it to do with a shorter rod. And that's the nice thing about the braid too. It helps you because it's got no stretch, so you can make that bait move quick from a long ways away.
Yeah. See, for me, what I'll do is I'll use a 20-pound braid. Yeah. And then I go to a 12, believe it or not, I go to a 12-pound mono leader.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Because and I can't help it. It's like, you play golf, we play golf. Somebody says to me, listen, Dan, it's just a light 7-iron. I'm like, great. So it's a full 8. Perfect. Right? Yeah, I can't do it. You just got to tap that 6. Good. I'm going to smash a 9-iron.
I'm the same way. I go full or forget it.
Yeah, I can't do it, right? So if I'm going to set the hook hard, and I need to have that little bit. Trilene makes a cranking line, which is actually kind of nice. It's a bit of a go between fluorocarbon and mono, and it still floats, right? So which is good. So it keeps that leader out of the hooks, like what we were talking about, and I still get that stretch. And I'll run 6 to 8 feet of it, which is what I find is pretty good. Yeah. And in Georgian Bay last summer, I was throwing the smaller walking bait, and I don't know, I must have got at least 45 or 50 smallies on it. And it was just out, in Georgian Bay, when they're on that topwater bait, it's just out and lights out. It really is.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun.
I don't think there's a more fun way to catch fish myself.
There really, yeah. Other than maybe jerk bait, I would say the topwater.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I like that. I like it when the fish likes a jerk bait more than I do, and he tries to take it from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ain't happening. It's just not happening, man.
Yeah.
But anyways.
So we've covered the gamut here, it looks like.
I think so, and we did it in an hour. Look at that, boys.
I know we're getting better at this, guys.
This is good.
I'm telling you.
The guys are in the Bassmaster Elite Series today.
Yeah.
I don't think our boys did too good.
No. You know what? It's going to take them. Listen, Corey and Chris are great anglers, but it's going to take them some time to adjust. I mean, the waters down there are a lot different.
Yeah.
And, as good as they are, it's going to take them some time. Like, Florida, I think, is an easy adjustment for them because it's similar to what we fish up here in the summertime with largemouth. But you start getting into those impoundments and stuff like that, it's a whole other ball game. They probably figure out one or two patterns, but the way fishing is, especially tournament fishing, you got to have a bunch of them because things can just change and conditions and water.
They've been sitting at home for a while, right? I mean, they're used to jumping back in the boat in the new year. And getting down to Okeechobee and getting down here and getting down to there. And they've been on the sidelines shooting deer and shooting bucks and a little bit of walleye fishing, a little bit of crappie fishing. So, I mean, just like in fishing, we all, we get a little untuned and things when we're not into it, as much as we're normal. So I think all of us, they're a little bit behind their season.
Well, I also think they're used to fishing, spawning bass.
Yeah. Right now, but you know what? They're good sticks, man.
They'll figure it out, man.
They'll figure it out. It's a matter of time. They'll be up there with the big boys.
Oh yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah, I think Gussie's he's in top 40 right now. I've got him booked on the show in a couple of weeks when he gets back from UFollow. So
that's cool. Yeah, he's a good guy.
I'll have a talk with him.
Yeah,
right on, man.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for me, man. What else we got?
Yeah. Nick, thanks for coming on again, bud. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I think everybody got a lot of information about jerk baits, crankbaits, topwater. Again, where can we find you again?
You can find me on my Instagram account at Cousvis_fishing. Facebook is just Nick Cousvis. And if anybody's got any questions, just get me on Instagram. I answer everybody's question as much as I can. I don't think I've missed anybody on Instagram. I'm pretty good with that. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
Are you doing guiding as well, Nick?
Yeah, I do. I do more lessons on the water than I do guiding. I have a couple of customers that I guide, but it's generally a lot of lessons. So setup and, really not about catching fish, just more about how to work a bait, the type of rod that you should have for certain things. Right. It's a hard thing, especially for guys that are just getting started. It's not like golf, man. You walk into a tackle store and there's so many rods, and then what reel do I put in, and what line do I attach, and then what goes with this, and how do I so it's just a lot of stuff. So I just fast track guys and get them going. I'll tell you a quick story. The customer I just started working with, and he just got back from French River, and I set him up. I did a couple of trips with him on the water, just trying to teach him some of the techniques that we had talked about. And he just messaged me yesterday, and he said, Nick, I just got back from the trip. He's been doing this trip for years. And he's like, we had a great time. We caught a fish, because we can actually say for the first time in our lives that we went on a fishing trip, not just a trip. Because he said,
not a lure watching trip.
But good. I mean, it's good, but I'm just helping him. I'm trying to fast track him a bit and get him going. And, by the end of the year, he'll be in good shape and he'll be able to go and find fish. And, he's really worked in 2 days, man. He's learned a lot. It's been good.
That's awesome.
Well, and that's really the whole point. I mean, even with this show and some of the other shows on YouTube, I mean, it's all about, transferring information, giving new people, and even old dogs like us can learn stuff, right? So it's pretty
absolutely
every day, man. Every day. If you're not learning,
absolutely,
you're not doing something right.
All right, bye, Nick. Thanks again, buddy. Thanks, appreciate you coming on, man. We'll catch up with you again. All right, bud.
Okay, man. Stay safe.
Take care, Nick. See you, man. Peace. Peace. Bye-bye.
Danny.
Yeah, man.
Awesome job as usual.
Buddy, it was pretty awesome. You know, Nick's a great guy to have a great conversation with. You know, he's open, he's honest. Yeah, just what definitely one of the good ones, man.
Yeah, it's fun for me too because I mean I'll admit it, I'm not scared. I'm a jig guy.
Yep.
Like 99% of the time, I'm throwing a jig,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be a hair jig, could be a flipping jig, could be micro jig, could be any, but I'm throwing a jig.
Yeah.
So to get to talk to guys that are really dialed in to hard baits like that, you learn something. And I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, like, and you still learn something.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I made the jump and the transition myself probably, I'm going to say probably 7 years ago to start, you know, throwing jerk baits more. 7, 8 years ago, throwing jerk baits, throwing crankbaits. You know, I still haven't gotten around to throwing lipless crankbaits. I just can't seem to fit that into my arsenal. But deep diving crankbaits, I mean, catching largemouth on the St. Lawrence River in 18 to 25 feet of water. I mean, we were doing that. Big Jim McLaughlin was catching fish and winning classics in Aurelia on crankbaits back in the early 80s. So, you know, it's something that I figure in my own fishing career, you know, if I wanted to keep fishing tournaments and being competitive now, that I had to learn something else than fishing a jig. Now, don't get me wrong. I can still slide that thing under little targets and everything else and hit a dime from 40 feet, 50 feet. But there's just some times when they got to get something different. And it's part of my arsenal.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of what we've learned the last couple of weeks. There's you know,
For sure.
if you're going to be a successful tournament angler or successful at angling anyway, you got to be diverse. You got to.
But we like catching fish, right? You know,
Well,
I used to say, man, if it was a spinnerbait bite, I ain't getting bit. And you know, and that really wasn't a great way. And then that hurt me for a couple of years. And then, man, I've got different spinnerbait blade combinations. Sometimes a double willow leaf, sometimes Colorado, and then playing around with the weights. And then I've got some big thumper blades that, you know, off of a musky bait on a 1/2 ounce blade. You can just throw that. I literally flip that thing around cover, around pads and stuff, and it will outfish a jig when they've seen too many jigs.
Yeah.
You know, so
No, it's
again,
about doing what you got to do.
absolutely, man.
So,
Anyways,
Danny,
thanks a lot, buddy. It was a blast. You give me a call anytime.
Thanks for being my co-host for the last 2 weeks. Been awesome, bud.
Right on. You call me anytime. I'm here, buddy.
All right, man. We'll catch up with you.
Take care. Peace.
Okay, bye. Okay, guys. I hope you liked that. I hope you got something out of that. That was a lot of fun for us for the last couple of weeks. Nick's an awesome guy. So is Danny. So if you liked the video, hit like and consider subscribing to the channel. That would be awesome. And we will see you next Wednesday. Have a great week, everybody.